Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Gabriela Lena Frank, and there are so many ways in which I can describe her. I will try to be quick, but at least let me just say composer, pianist, currently serving as composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra, was included in Washington Post's list of 35 most significant women composers in history, period. In 2020, Gabriela was the recipient of the prestigious Heinz Award, which amongst the prestige comes with a little bit of support in $250,000 of unrestricted funds. She holds a Guggenheim Fellowship, USA Artist Fellowship, and of course, I would be remiss if not including a recipient of the Sphinx Medal of Excellence. Gabriela, welcome to the show.
Hello, Aaron. It's really good to be with you. My old schoolmate from our Wolverine days at U of M as well.
That is right. That is right. Go blue, go blue. Of course, this is really especially an honor and exciting for me to be able to have you on the show. I've been lucky enough to be able to know you and call you a friend and a colleague for so many years, and just witness the extraordinary impact that you have, not only through the compositions that you create, and your presence in terms of as a musician, but also your leadership, and of course, which we will talk about. And, I thought I would just start off by sharing, you do this incredible work in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Orchestra helped us co-curate this show. They're one of our wonderful creative partners. And you serve as artist in residence. And I was just wondering, right, because a lot of, specifically composer in residence, and a lot of our audience are orchestras, orchestral leaders. So if you could just share kind of, how do you view that role? Because it's sometimes it's defined differently. How do you view it? And kind of along with that, how do you view kind of your role as an arts citizen?
It's a wonderful question, and I think it's one that I revisit all the time because, strictly speaking, I'm a freelancer, which means that my life is very nimble. And so something like serving as a composer in residence with a major storied institution like the Philadelphia Orchestra means looking at their community, looking at their music community and non-music community, I should specify, and trying to figure out how I can interface with that, with the gifts that I bring to the table and the perspectives that I bring to the table. It's not a transactional kind of relationship where I get a commission and I do what I want and they premiere it and we all leave and go home happy. There's constant dialogues and meeting different constituencies within Philadelphia. So there have been meetings with school districts, and there have been meetings with muralists, other of our artistic colleagues exercising their gifts in a totally different kind of art form. So it really depends on what the orchestra deems as valuable for their audiences, and they know that. It's a skill set that I learned on the job. I wasn't trained in the conservatory for this. So the dialoguing is essential, and you want to look for orchestras and composers that are interested in people. And I think we all know when we just get that vibe about an institution or an individual that they're really just interested in people and can find a certain version of themselves that's still authentic but pivots in a very specific direction. So the first time I worked with Philadelphia was almost 10 years ago when Yannick came on board, and I wrote the piece inaugurating his tenure. And I was kind of being auditioned, and Yannick had just gone through like a year-long audition process. I mean, this is how we check each other out. We do a smaller project first, and then a few years later, it often leads to something bigger. So that's how I got offered the position of a multi-year residency. And I remember beginning conversations with them about my love of Latin American mythology at that early point, and talking about this doesn't belong in a museum. There are current timeless lessons for us now. And in 2012, gosh, it seems like a different era. It was way before COVID. We were in the middle of a different presidency. There were some interesting questions already coming up about Latino power, voting power, economic power that I remember. And we were asking questions already then in this new modern era of who's a good American? What does an American look like? And this has taken on even more pressing urgency, I think, in the last few years. So I'm writing a piece for Philly because it's such a multicultural, amazing, historically important city called Picaflor. The Chronicles of Picaflor, it might be, but they asked for, I think the idea came out also because they programmed my earlier work with the Rite of Spring. So they said, can you do something that's something like the Rite of Spring with episodic, small, incredible, evocative movements that shows off the virtuosity of our orchestra, that's based on mythology, and still is gripping today. And the picaflor means a hummingbird. And a hummingbird is the creator of life in many South American mythological stories. And it's sometimes a Prometheus story. A small bird from the sky to the heavens finds a little rip, falls through to the watery, dark planet below, brings in a Noah's Ark-like cascade of other creatures. They try and get back to the sky, traverse all these lands, seeing strange people, and in the guise of doing so, they spawn races, they spawn mountains and rivers, and it's just an incredibly evocative story, ripe for a composer to come in and serve this specific need of this residency.
This is just, it's so extraordinary. So many things that you've shared stand out. And especially, I think so many people still view, right, like commissions and working with composers, the composer just kind of sits alone somewhere, creates the piece, delivers the piece to the orchestra or chamber group, whatever it might be, and then goes away, and that's kind of it. And I just love this, the complexity, the intricacy, the engagement with community that's involved in this. It's really truly, extraordinary. And so, especially right with the past year, everyone's been talking about issues relating to race and culture, certainly more than I ever recall, right? And even going back to our days at Michigan, so it was like, wait, what? Race and the arts, those should not even be involved. So everyone's kind of talking about it right now. And I was just wondering kind of, how do you view that? So for, say, emerging composers or just artists who are looking and saying, should I put my cultural heritage into this work, or should, as a musician, I just be, interpreting someone else, or as a composer, should I kind of be following these strictures and these, kind of rules and things that I've been taught? How do you view incorporating your own culture in your artistic work?
Well, I started doing that at Michigan. And I remember, I had no choice. It was when my best music was coming out. When I was trying to do the right thing, it was not my best music. And I was actually even hating the process and not feeling blessed to have found a calling of that music. I mean, we human beings are very good at messing up our blessings as well as finding them. And I realized I was messing up my blessing. I knew I was supposed to be composing on this planet. And I had to resist certain messages that were presented to me of what a composer looks like. A composer looks like somebody that applies for a lot of competitions. I didn't do any of that while we were at Michigan. A composer looks like somebody that goes to Europe to find inspiration and to study with teachers. I went to Peru, which is my mother's homeland. Nobody goes to Peru for classical music. And I reconciled myself consequentially, which is a little bit telling, that I was not going to have a career of substance like I do now, that it meant that I might be a well-beloved teacher at a small, maybe liberal arts college doing this strange stuff, and instead the opposite happened. So I still feel that by mining for my own heritage and doing the hard work of finding its place, that's where people get tripped up. there's a lot of hard work in feeling like that you can sit at the table with Beethoven and the great minds of the West and the Western culture. And you have to separate that from, say, the crimes or the transgressions or the unfortunate happenstance of a dominant culture like that. It's a lot to carry as a young person, and it's taken me decades to find my place and then to be able to usher in an easier arena for our younger siblings coming up. They shouldn't have to work as hard as you. I remember your string quartet when we were making these arguments, and sometimes we were gently tolerated and say, but make sure you get your Beethoven up, make sure you do those. So we had to double time it. We had to play that Beethoven really well, and as well as somehow in our own dime and time, go to Peru or go to these other places. So I think now, gosh, when all the dialogue began to happen last year, I never thought it was going to happen in my lifetime. I never thought I would see it so prevalent. And some of it was very skilled, high level conversation. Some of it wasn't, where people would put on their black hat and Latino hat very easily and then realize that's not going to be sufficient. So I think the step forward is dialoguing. Sometimes you have to go on instinct. You hear something, it's intriguing, you don't know what you're going to do with it. Are you going to program this person? Are you going to say, can I just pay you a consult fee of a couple $100, just talk with me about repertoire? Go there. Do these unorthodox things that don't look like what an arts admin person does or a composer does. This is the time. Everything's loose. Everything's shaky. Everything's like, there's
Right.
opportunity in this crisis.
Right.
All of these crises, and the sky's not going to fall if you open up a dialogue. And it's so against our grain as trained superheroes. They're like athletes, the way we're trained in ritual, the stuff we can do with a bow and wood. It's so we want that kind of superhero result right away. And in order to make progress on these fronts of inclusion, there's going to be this risk that we have to get comfortable with.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, just truly extraordinary. Of course, could not agree more. And a powerful impact, and especially for emerging composers coming up and other leaders. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But two quick things. Usually, I just ask this kind of question because I'm always curious for, I guess, when times are tough, kind of where do you draw on for your inspiration? Where do you find that strength when things are the hardest? So I do want to ask that. But just before I ask that, I have seen pictures of you with lots and lots of bees. And so I wanted to make sure I talk and we share with the audience. So what's up with bees?
So when I was still living in the Bay Area, my last home in the Bay Area, I left Oakland about 5.5 years ago to go to the country. But I was decompressing from all my travels on the road and staying in hotels and my concerts. I became an urban homesteader. So I had chickens in Oakland and I had a beehive in Oakland and learned how to make cheese. And I was very proud. I mean, Oakland and Brooklyn's another place. There's a small contingent in Philadelphia of these really proud urban homesteaders feeding themselves. So I was doing that kind of work. Um, Gosh, once you get into bee culture and you see the role that they play and the dances and the way they communicate, and they're a wonderful metaphor how humans need to work together. The bees are like cells in an organism, how everything facilitates and how they're in harmony with one another. And so I do like to go and tend to my bees and tend to my garden and plant bee-friendly flowers for them. And it's helped me to have another arena in my life that's about equity in a certain kind of way.
Wow, it's truly beautiful, and it might even relate to your answer to that next question, which is, so how do you, when the times are tough, even with the extraordinary success and accomplishments you've had, there's got to be some really tough days. And on those days, where do you find the strength or inspiration to overcome those?
Wonderful question. I'm always adding more things to my toolkit of thriving, not just surviving. And I think one thing that really helps me is to be in a habit of constantly zeroing out. So when we get into the details of our life and a commission doesn't work out, or we're frustrated that some injustice hasn't been addressed, is to zero out and look at the long-term progress of where we are. Ultimately, I'm optimistic for all the hardships that we have been through, all the things that we have seen and that we have not yet landed from the last few years, all the turmoil. When I zero out, human progress is bumpy. It really is. But I feel like that we are still moving forward. And ultimately, I'm an optimist. So if I can find the fortitude to disengage from the pain of the moment, my frustration of the moment, sadness of the moment, and look at the larger picture and look at how many people are on the same page, it gives me strength to go through another day. Yeah, and more than one day.
Gabriela Lena Frank, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you. Thank you so much for your leadership, for your friendship, your artistry, your talent, and for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron.